Theme 8, relationships and families, looking at paper 2 from the exam. So obviously paper 1 was Christianity and Islam. Paper 2 is themes. So you can just see the brief outline of the 4 themes that we do there, that you'll be sitting in the exam. So relationships and families, theme A, theme B, religion and life, theme D, religion, peace and conflict, and then theme E, religion, crime and punishment. And that's the one we did at the beginning of the term. So hopefully you remember some things from that. So we're going to be looking at theme A today, so relationships and families. So what you'll notice is, what you'll hopefully notice is that a lot of the religious views are very similar in terms of you'll be able to kind of pick out the Catholic views and the non-Catholic, other Christian views, and the Muslims' views are very, very similar on different points within this chapter. So it's quite easy to remember what different religions think about these various points. So we're looking at sex before and outside of marriage. We're looking at contraception and views on that. We're looking at homosexuality. We're looking at reasons for marriage and the purpose of a family, and then marriage ceremonies. And then we're looking at divorce and remarriage, and then attitudes and examples of gender equality and inequality in religion. And then at the end, I've included a keyword slide and a helpful quote slide. So those might be useful to take a screenshot of or a picture. So before we get into particular theme A, I just thought I'd share this slide with you. So when we're thinking about the themes, this is a really helpful slide because these kind of themes within each religion, the things that you can apply to all 4 of the themes that we look at. So Christianity, just remember Jesus's 2 key teachings, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. Think about how you can link those teachings in. They definitely link in with theme A, and they'll link in with the other 3 themes as well. As well as that, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it says that God created the world, and it also says that human beings are created in the image of God. Male and female are created in the image of God. So think about what that says about creation, about the purpose of men and women. Think about how that perhaps relates to marriage, gender equality, and then how that could relate to the kind of the value of a human being, looking at topics within theme B and theme D. The idea of equality and justice, forgiveness as well in that, and that definitely comes up in theme A as well. Islam, the themes of the Ummah, the brotherhood and the community of all believers. So the idea of equality, all Muslims being equal. Thinking about the 5 pillars. You've done that, did that yesterday in paper 1. The duties that a Muslim has to follow. How does that link to something that could link to some of the themes? Sharia law and the value of life in that. And then paradise being a reward for people who have been morally good. How could that link in with some of these themes? Perhaps like divorce or violence or war or the death penalty, crime and punishment, definitely linking in. And I've included Buddhism there because it links quite nicely to some of these ideas and it's quite easy to remember, but don't worry if you don't remember it. Okay. In theme A then, the first kind of subtopic within theme A is sex before and outside of marriage. So what you really need to be aware of is contrasting views, different views on this particular topic. So Christianity at the top there, most Christians, and you could say in your exam, most Christians, you could say Catholics, definitely agreeing with this, believe that sex should only take place within a marriage. And there's a quote from in Catholicism to say that sex should only take place within a marriage, and the marriage is between a man and a woman. So very clear guidelines and in the Bible, sex before marriage is called fornication and is seen as a sin, is deemed as wrong, and it's very quite clear cut on that. So most Christians would take this view, and definitely Catholics would take this view. Bible quotes that you could use: let marriage be held in honor among all of you. Again, you don't have to remember the whole quote, but a couple of phrases or words that just link in and back up the points that you're making. And this one, do not commit adultery. Adultery can be seen as cheating. It could be viewed in the context of divorce. It could be viewed in the context of just anything outside of marriage could be seen as adultery. So that you could use that quote there to make lots of points and link to lots of views. So there's the kind of clear, the Catholic view. Then there's liberal Christianity. Some Christians accept that sex before marriage is permitted, is acceptable, if the adults involved are in a long-term committed relationship. So there's two things there. One, adults, and secondly, long-term committed relationship. So the idea that the couple involved are committed to each other, it's a long-term thing. There's that expression of love and deep love for each other. They see it as an expression of their commitment. And perhaps you could use as a reason is that in the modern world, marriage and marriage ceremonies are extremely expensive, and they can take a long time to pay for and to arrange. So actually, to go through that whole process may take years. So it's hardly kind of fair to stop a couple from doing that just because they can't afford it. And particularly if they want to have a family before they're married. Again, it's not very fair perhaps to make them wait until they can afford it if that's an issue for them. So you could use that as a point. And then Islam, in Islam, for Muslims, it's a religious duty to get married and to have children. So it's part of their kind of religious duty, part of keeping their religion going. And you'll notice later on that when it comes under the purpose of family, it's a duty for them to get married and to have children. And the idea of the extended wider family, parents, grandparents, aunties and uncles, is what forms the foundation for Islamic society. And as a result, Islamic law almost forbids celibacy as a choice. So there's a real push against it. Whereas for Christians, they may choose to be celibate and become like a monk or a nun or a priest as a choice. And very similar to kind of the Catholic view, they forbid sex outside of marriage, any kind of in whatever form that may take. And the reason for that is they say that in forbidding it, it avoids all the issues in society that relate to sex outside of marriage, such as underage pregnancies, abortions, adoptions, adultery, and anything else you can think of. They say that if we just ban it, then it avoids all these issues. Obviously, you can think of strengths and weaknesses to that particular viewpoint. They say it's a way of protecting society. And then a very similar quote there in the highlighted yellow: do not commit adultery, it is a shameful and an evil act. Very similar to the quote from the Bible. And for Muslims, under Sharia law, anyone who commits a sexual sin, such as sex before marriage, adultery, and homosexuality, in their viewpoint, should be flogged, and there's a punishment. And it's seen as a sin. So contrasting views there. Then we come on to the topic of contraception. And in the box there, you've got the main types of contraception. Now, you don't need to be aware of all of them. Obviously, it's not a science quiz, a science test, but just to be able to list a few of them, because you may get a 1 or 2 mark question on that, or might need to refer to 1 or 2 in the 12-mark question. Particularly being able to tell the difference between natural and artificial contraception. So, number 1, withdrawal. That's obviously a natural contraception, but 2, barrier, hysterectomies, vasectomies, and the pill. And then the other examples would be more artificial contraception. So be able to tell the difference. And you may get a 2-mark question asking for, give 2 reasons for why people use contraception. And the box there underneath it. So for the health of the mother, a family may already be large enough so they can't provide for any more children, or they want to provide a better standard of living, so they don't want to have any more children. prevention of STIs, STDs, pregnancies, and to enjoy sex without worrying about the potential of a pregnancy. So think about a 2-mark question. Would you just give in 2 of those bullet points? And then potentially thinking about a 4 or 5-mark question, asking for contrasting views. Catholic, non-Catholic, Protestant, and Islamic views. So the Catholic view is kind of the odd one out. So it's a really easy one to remember, is that they only allow, or they only permit, natural contraception, because they teach that sexual intercourse is a gift from God, as a source of joy and as a means of creating a family. And they would say that any sexual activity should have the prospect of procreation. Procreation is a really big key theme in Catholicism, and if sex does not have the kind of possibility of procreation, that means creating life, then it's artificial, it's unnatural, and it's not allowed. So only natural contraception is allowed.
What does Anglican mean?
Hang on. Good question. Are you referring to the orange box here?
No, it's just on the original sheet. It says Catholic and Anglicans Protestant.
Oh, okay, right. Anglican just is another way of saying Church of England, and yeah, you could use the Protestant view. Yeah. So non-Catholics, Anglicans, generally Protestant Christians would say that contraception is permissible as long as we're talking about sex between a married couple, obviously. For the reasons that we've listed already. So they would use the same reasons to say that that's why contraception is acceptable: to protect the health of the mother, to restrict the size of the family, for affordability reasons. They believe God created sex for enjoyment and to cement the bonds of a marriage within that particular marriage. So it should only be within a marriage, and contraception allows that possibility. And the idea of just not having children all the time is not against God's will. There's nothing in the Bible that specifically forbids the use of contraception. For Muslims, it's a very similar view to the Anglican or Protestant view, in that contraception is acceptable, obviously within a marriage. However, there is the flip side, and that children are seen as a rich blessing, and as we've already talked about, having children, having a family is almost a duty in Islam. So Allah, encourages large Muslim families, and there's 2 quotes here that you could use. You can just use one of them. But if Allah wishes to create a child, you cannot prevent it. That's about having a large family and taking every opportunity you can to have children, and not limiting perhaps the size of your family. Fertility is highly prized, and children are a gift of God to bring joy to our eyes. Again, promoting the idea of fertility, which means having children, and again, the idea that children are a gift of God. So experiencing that gift of God, not limiting the ability, that kind of potential. So contrasting views, remember to be able to pick out the contrasting views there. Okay, so homosexuality. Obviously, we could talk for a long time about different views on this, but it's just, the main thing is to be able to pick out the contrasting views. If you get a 5-mark question or a 12-mark question, you need to be able to talk about contrasting views. And to be able to use different quotes, and the key skills, the really kind of high ability skills here that we're talking about, is to be able to use the same quote but look at it from perhaps different points of view. So quotes on homosexuality here at the top of the screen, in the bold bit there from the Bible. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So this is obviously referring to a man and his wife being married, being united, and the two becoming one flesh, spiritually, physically, in the act, in the sexual act, and kind of spiritually before God, and financially, and everything that kind of means. And it's obviously referring to marriage between a man and a woman. But then there's the quote from Leviticus, also from the Bible: "A man who lies with another man shall be put to death." So this is clearly a quote here against homosexuality. But you could take this and you say, well, this was written, you could, contrast the view and say, well, this was written a long time ago in a very different society, and perhaps we have different views now. So, you could definitely contrast it, and we don't put people to death for these kinds of things anymore, obviously, and we accept them as an equal. So you could definitely kind of evaluate that statement. The Hadith, which is the sayings and the teachings of Muhammad: homosexuality, sex before marriage, and adultery are punishable by flogging. Again, that going against homosexuality there. These two quotes here, the fourth and the fifth bullet points, these are the ones you could evaluate and actually argue for both sides, for and against homosexuality. They're both from the Bible. Men and women were created in the image of God. So you could use that and you could say, well, men and women were created together in the image of God to be together as a man, husband and wife. So not on the side of homosexuality. But then you could also say, well, if men and women were created in the image of God, everyone is created in the image of God, then doesn't that mean that people who have homosexual feelings and who would class themselves as homosexual, well, weren't they created in the image of God too? And weren't they created, equally in the sight of God and by God, and everything the same as heterosexuals? So, and if that's the case, then surely we should, surely religion should accept homosexual people as created in the image of God like everybody else. So you could use that, you could evaluate that quote from both sides. And there is a real debate going on within Christianity about homosexuals. Are they created in the image of God? Are they not? And what does that mean? It's something you could look into. And then love your neighbor as yourself. That quote that we refer to all the time because you can bring it into absolutely everything. What's the most loving thing to do in this situation when we're talking about this topic? Is it to push people away? Is it to welcome them? Is it to accept people? So you could use to argue kind of in favor of accepting homosexuals into religion, into the church. So particular Christian views that you can explain, predominantly Catholic view, forbid homosexuality. Remember, that comes under one of the topics of sexual sin within the Catholic Church. And the same category as sex before marriage and adultery and homosexuality. And they say that if you are somebody with homosexual feelings, then you should choose celibacy. That means to not have sex at all with any partner as your kind of life choice. Remember, they say that sex should always have the capability, the potential of procreation, which means having children. And obviously homosexuality cannot do this. So that's one of their reasons for this. And for Catholics, sex should only take place within marriage. And for them, marriage is between a husband and a wife. So going against homosexuality. And generally, this is a Catholic view, but other Christians may take this view as well. It's not limited to Catholic views. Then in the middle, you've got other Christian views. So there's a wide variety of Christian views on this unit, on this topic. There's recent 20th and 21st century theologians have reinterpreted the Bible to support homosexuals and the LGBT put that the wrong way around. Community. And like I was saying with that quote about men and women created in the image of God, they've been looking at that and saying, well, what does that mean for people who are homosexual or have homosexual feelings, or transgender people? Are they created in the image of God? And if so, what does that mean? How do we perhaps reinterpret the Bible or the way we do religion? So I'm asking that question again. And then you've got Quakers, a particular denomination within Christianity, a good one to remember for this topic, and a good one to remember for theme D, religion, peace and conflict. So they accept homosexuals, into their faith. They say everyone is created in the image of God. So whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, and everyone has the light of God in them. So they do not condemn homosexuals in any way. They welcome them and treat them as equals. So it's a good contrasting view. From the Muslim point of view, generally, Muslim states in Muslim countries, homosexuality is illegal, and it's usually a sin. Seen as a sin, sorry, is seen as a sin, and it's usually punishable by flogging or death. And there's been recent examples, I think, in Indonesia and in Pakistan of homosexuals being publicly punished, publicly flogged, or publicly put to death for what they've been caught doing. And homosexuals might find it difficult to be accepted into a mosque in most of these countries, but some mosques in Western countries have started to accept and started to kind of embrace this as a change in their religion and their religious views, and there is some kind of transition in their views going on. And something else to kind of be aware of that perhaps adds to this transition in view within Islam is that gender realignment surgery, which is obviously quite a recent thing, is legal in Islam and in most Islamic countries, or in the Islamic countries that can perform this surgery. So this is legal, which means that perhaps homosexuals may not be able to practice or have homosexual partners, but they could probably go down this line instead as a way of the faith accepting them into Islam accepting them into their faith. So it's something to be aware of and something to perhaps bring into a 12-mark question if you're talking about homosexuality and religious views. But mainly the thing to be aware of, the contrasting views, a couple of quotes that you can really easily link to each one. Okay, and you'll notice that the quotes kind of apply to most of these units, so you don't really need to remember that many. So marriage ceremonies. Now, this comes under the reasons for marriage and the purpose of a family. So you might get a 2-mark question on the purpose of a family or the reasons for marriage. In the box there, to raise children, to legitimize a relationship, for love, financial benefits, for companionship, for sex, as a religious duty, to legitimize a child. So your 2-mark question might be a generic one, like two reasons for marriage. It might also be a specific one, like 2 religious reasons for getting married, or 2 religious purposes of a family. Then you might talk about for sex, or to raise a child, or to raise a child in the faith, or to further the community of their faith, or as a religious duty. Definitely in Islam that would come under a religious duty. Okay, so you don't need to know the marriage ceremonies in detail, but a general kind of understanding of what a marriage ceremony looks like, and perhaps some of the differences between Christianity and Islam in the marriage ceremonies. So generally in an Islamic marriage ceremony, it would last up to 5 days. So there's a big difference between a Christian one, which is only 1 day, and that's based on the cultural and traditional celebrations. So the ceremony itself takes place on day 4, and it's called a nikah. And it's a simple ceremony performed by the imam. Remember, that's the leader of the mosque, the man who leads prayers on Friday. Hopefully you mentioned that yesterday in the PPE. And it generally takes place at the home of the bride or groom, so not in the mosque itself. And the key points that the bride must give her consent before the ceremony starts. So the bride is asked for her consent before the ceremony and is asked for her consent 3 times during the ceremony itself. So the groom has to declare a dowry to show respect for his bride. That could be anything financially based, so money, clothes, even a house. This can be either paid up front or paid over the many years, kind of the groom's commitment to his wife. Some couples make vows, so it's not compulsory in an Islamic marriage ceremony. They're kind of unspoken, and they have to sign the registrar, which is the marriage contract. The imam might read verses from the Quran, and the nikah khutbah, which is the marriage sermon, traditional marriage sermon in Islam. In Christianity, a typical Christian wedding, the couple will come to church, so again different already to the Islamic marriage ceremony, and they'll be united by a priest in an official holy marriage. So the similarities, they're both very communal events. The difference is Christianity is one day and it takes place in the church. Before the couple say their vows, the priest will give a sermon or a homily to the audience to explain the significance and the meaning of marriage in Christianity, and will probably refer to Bible passages. And usually in a marriage ceremony in a Christian church, the pastor might refer to 1 Corinthians 13, which is what our assemblies at the moment are based on. So if you can use any of those quotes on what love is, then definitely bring that into a question on this. The priest declares that they have agreed to marry and accepts the decision, and will take them through their vows, and they'll sign the registrar, and they'll exchange rings, and then the priest will pray for them in front of the whole church. So just about being aware of some of the similarities and some of the differences that you could use. All right. So, nature and purpose of family. You could get a question on this. So it's just about being aware of the different views and perhaps some of the changing views within these religions. So Christian views on the nature and purpose of family. Christian parents generally want their children to grow up with values such as respect, compassion, loyalty, commitment to the faith, reading, education, those type of things. And so some of the things that Christian parents might do for their children was like baptize them, take them to church, dedicate them, those type of things that you might have mentioned in the Christian practices PPE. And for Christians, love is at the heart of all relationships. And so they might say that this as a reason for why polygamy is not permitted in Christianity. That's having more than one wife, not permitted in Christianity. So the ideal marriage in Christianity is between a man and a woman, and that was what God intended at creation when he said, when he created Adam and Eve to be together as the first husband and wife. And for Christians, the family is central to the church, to people actually going to church. You'll see they're going to families, and the role of the church in the community itself is very kind of family orientated. And when it comes to kind of the purpose of a family itself, you could use this quote: honor your father and your mother, one of the 10 commandments that God gave to the Israelites. You know, that a family is set up to kind of produce this honor, this value of honor. Children honoring their mother and father, but also their mother and father honoring their children in the decisions that they make and the choices that they make and the way they go about life. You know, historically, traditionally, men and women had separate roles in the family in Christians, but recently views are becoming kind of more moderate, and in Christianity there isn't such a distinct role for men and women. They can change. Either men or women can stay at home, look after raise the household. Men or women can go to work. There isn't such a traditional focus anymore. And when it comes to cohabitation, which is living with someone who you're not married to, Catholics will disagree with that, but liberal Christians may agree. Again, coming back to that point about kind of the financial point, about not being able to afford to get married, or the idea that they're in a loving relationship and they intend to get married. So this idea of a committed loving relationship, then cohabitation is permitted. Okay. But then so Islamic views. Now, Islam, much like Christianity, places a huge value on family and the extended family. So you may notice that the Muslim community do things as an extended family, do things together. And the extended family, that's kind of grandparents, aunties and uncles, forms the basis of Islamic society. And having that wider society, that extended family around you locally, often, is part of God's plan for how human beings should live in Islam. And it's about marriage and about having children as a duty. So cohabitation, therefore, is not permitted in Islam in any form. Remember, we talked about sex before marriage being not permitted in any form, and neither is cohabitation. Islam does allow, if the country permits it, for a man to have more than one wife. So polygamy is permitted, and that's based on the example of the Prophet Muhammad, who had more than one wife. Traditionally, the nature of a family, the purpose of a family, men are expected to work, provide financially, and take responsibility for major decisions of the household in Islam, and women have the important role of looking after the household and raising the children. That doesn't mean they're kind of unequal, that just means they have different roles. And a Muslim mother commands great respect in the community. And here's a quote from the Quran, direct from the Prophet Muhammad: "Heaven is under the feet of the mothers." So kind of promoting the respect of women, particularly mothers, and their role in the household. And the Prophet Muhammad regularly refers to his mother and values his mother in the Quran. And obviously you could bring in the fact that the Prophet Muhammad had his first wife, Khadija, was older than him. She had a business that she continued to run when they were married. So there's this idea of kind of equality in Islam, particularly looking at the Prophet Muhammad. So attitudes to remarriage then and divorce. Now, when it comes to kind of non-religious ideas and examples and reasons for divorce or remarriage, I won't have time to go over those, but I'm sure you can use the textbook or perhaps come up with your own ideas. We talked a lot about this last year, in year 10, reasons for divorce and for remarriage outside of kind of religious ideas. But for the exam, the main things to be aware of are contrasting views, and then to be able to evaluate and look at the impact of how these views might actually impact society and change the way people behave and the choices people make. So looking at divorce, Roman Catholics or just Catholics, divorce is wrong, always wrong. Marriage is a covenant. That means a contract until death, which cannot be broken. Catholics would say that marriage takes place and is signed in the sight of God. So anything that is done in the sight of God and with the blessing of God cannot be undone by human actions or human words. And in Catholicism, even if the couple get a civil divorce, so they go to court and they get a divorce, the church will not recognize that. So the Catholic Church will not remarry people, even if they have a divorce statement. And you could use that quote, "God hates divorce," from the Bible to kind of support their reasons for that. The only way that a person could get remarried in the Catholic Church is if they have an annulment. So an annulment is different from a divorce statement. An annulment means that the marriage was never a real marriage in the first place. So they'll have to go to court for this, but if they can get an annulment on the marriage, then they are free, as it were, to remarry, but only under those circumstances. And it is very difficult to get an annulment, and that usually has to be done very quickly. So the possibility of remarriage in Catholic Church is very low. For non-Catholics, you might use the phrase Anglicans or Church of England, Protestants. Divorce is seen as wrong, but it is accepted as a last resort in a broken marriage, particularly when adultery has occurred. So that's cheating, where one partner has cheated or left the other one. Then there's kind of almost no option but to divorce. And perhaps this might be kind of seen as the lesser of two evils. And, particularly if there's children involved and the marriage is really, really unhappy, perhaps there's lots of arguing, then perhaps divorce is kind of the lesser of two evils and the best way forward. So Church of England pastors and those of other non-Catholic denominations are allowed to conduct remarriage services. So they're allowed to marry people who have already been married, but only if they feel comfortable. So the emphasis is on the particular pastor themselves to engage with the couple, to see where they're at, to have lots of sessions and discussions with them about their past and their future. And then if the pastor themselves feel comfortable marrying them, then they'll do that. Or they might find another pastor who would feel comfortable doing it for them. And if they don't, they may just conduct a blessing. So some of the reasons why they might do that, and the quotes you could use, kind of the Good Samaritan teaching about helping out other people. So if they're in a bad situation with one marriage and they want to, they left that one because it was very painful, and they've spent some time kind of getting to know a new partner and they're very committed, perhaps that's the best thing to do, and perhaps the best thing to do for their children. You could use the phrase, blessed are the peacemakers, about making peace in a troubled situation for that person. Perhaps the best thing to do for them is to get married to a new person that they love very much, about making peace for the children if they're in an unhappy situation. And then love your neighbour as yourself. Again, asking what's the most loving thing to do in this situation. Is it to stop these two people getting married because they've been married before, or is it to allow them to express their love and to get married and to provide a stable home for their children if they have any? So you could ask those questions. Then in Islam, divorce is seen as a last resort, but it is permitted. And you could use the quote there, the throne of Allah or the throne of God shakes due to divorce. So very similar to the quote, God hates divorce. But it is permitted as a last resort. But Muslim couples are encouraged to work towards trying to fix their marriage issues before they go down the road of divorce. And if they do want to get a divorce, then the man or the woman will say, I divorce you 3 times to the other partner. And then there is a 3-month waiting period before the divorce is finalized. So there is that kind of waiting time for both sides to decide if they really want to go through with that or not. And Muslims do allow remarriage, because family and having children and being part of a marriage is a religious duty in Islam. So if they do get a divorce, particularly if it's in painful circumstances, then they still have to fulfill their religious duty. So they're really encouraged to get remarried. So even if they haven't had children, or if they have children and they're on their own, then getting remarried is kind of part and fulfilling that religious duty commanded by Allah. So Catholics on the issue of divorce and on the issue of remarriage are kind of the odd one out in these 3 views. Christians, other Christians and Muslims are very similar. Now we come to the last one, which is gender equality. So this is the way religions see gender. This obviously links to the roles of men and women in a marriage and the purpose of a family. And the roles of men and women in religious activities themselves. So in running a church or in running a mosque or in leading prayer. How do the roles and the attitudes to men and women differ? So key beliefs and quotes on the left-hand side. Some of the earliest converts to Christianity and some of the followers of Jesus were women. And this was a rather kind of world-changing thing to do. You'll notice in the resurrection story, which you might have mentioned in the exam, that Jesus appeared to women first. He appeared to Mary. And in those days, the testimony of women, what women said, was valued below what men said. So for Jesus to appear to a woman first, he was kind of undermining himself, because he really should have appeared to the highest person, which would have been a man, and a man somewhere high up the kind of social ladder, not a woman, someone who's at the bottom. So for him to do that kind of shows that he believed everybody was equal, and he valued perhaps the underdog, or the people who were seen less of by other people. And there's a couple of quotes here. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for all are one in Christ Jesus. You can bring out the idea of equality. You could even just use that last phrase, for all are one in Christ Jesus. The idea of equality from that particular Bible verse there, men and women being the same. And you could use the one we've already referred to about men and women being created in the image of God and by God as equal. So again, linking to the idea of equality. And in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad says, I command you to be kind to women. This was also in a society where women were undervalued and less important than men. So for him to say that was quite kind of revolutionary and different. And he was kind of implying that there is this equality, and we shouldn't, there shouldn't be this inferiority of men over women, or superiority of men over women. And you could also use the example of Muhammad. He married a businesswoman. His first wife, Khadija, was a businesswoman. And while they were married, she kept the ownership of her business, which in those days would have switched to the husband. He would have taken care and taken ownership of any business, of any property, money, etc. And so for him to let her keep the business and running it on her own was very different to the attitudes of his day. All right. So again, you could bring out the idea of equality and shared interest there. But then obviously you can refer to real life examples, and real life examples in religion are not as equal as some of these quotes make out. And you can bring out lots of evaluation points about the roles of men and women, changing attitudes. Some religious groups have changed and have developed their attitude to women, and some haven't. And you could definitely comment on that in an exam if you got like a 12-mark question on men and women being equal. Perhaps you might get a 12-mark question saying that men and women will never be equal, or will never have equality. And you could perhaps use some of these examples to say that, well, it's a long way, you know, the idea of men and women being completely equal and having equal opportunity to religious roles is still a long way off, perhaps, as some of these examples might explain. For instance, in Catholic churches, women are not allowed to be priests. They're not allowed any kind of, or not permitted to be any kind of official leadership role. A priest, a bishop, a cardinal, or a pope. None of those things, none of those leadership roles have ever been filled by women. They've always been men. And until that changes, they always will be. So you can argue, is there sexism? Is there kind of superiority of men over women in that particular example? There is a debate within the Catholic Church about that, but it hasn't kind of moved into any kind of action. In the Anglican Church, or Church of England, as of 2015, women can now be pastors of churches. They can become bishops. So there is a trend and a change that's taken place there, under the idea of equality, men and women having the same opportunities to jobs, to leadership roles in the Anglican Church. But that's still a real ongoing issue for Christians in the Anglican Church, a real ongoing issue. In Islam, all religious leaders are men. So it's very similar to the Catholic Church in that way. Imams in a mosque are 99% of the time men, and it's only very recently and only in Western countries that women have been able to have the opportunity to do that, to be a mosque leader. In 2018, Muslim Aid, hopefully you've come across that charity before. We talk about them in Islamic practices and in religion, peace and conflict. They launched a program to train up to 20 women a year as mosque leaders, so to give them the skills and the training that they need to do that. And so they're changing and they're adapting, developing, but only in some countries. And this is, Muslim Aid is a UK-based charity, so we're talking about UK, a Western country. The majority of Muslim countries do not allow this and do not permit this or encourage it. And you could also give the example of in mosques and in synagogues in Judaism that men and women sit separately. So in a mosque, women pray separately to the men. Men will pray in the main hall, in the prayer hall itself, and women will pray behind a screen or upstairs in a place where they can't see each other. So the men seem to get priority being in the main prayer hall itself. And in a synagogue in Judaism, the men and women sit separately, and the women generally do not take part in the service. They will just listen. The men will lead the service, like imams leading the prayers. So although the kind of evaluation here is that although the quotes and the religious texts themselves seem to encourage equality, the reality of the situation is that it seems very different. And you could definitely bring out those evaluation points if you had a 12-mark question on equality, gender equality, or the roles of men and women in your exam. So there's a slide that you might want to take a screenshot of or a picture of, all the key words when it comes to theme A. So there's quite a few, and the real thing, you don't want to lose simple marks like a 1-mark or 2-mark question because you don't understand the key word in the question. Something like chastity or nuclear, the difference between a nuclear family and extended family, or polygamy or cohabitation, or the difference between a marriage and a civil partnership. So you don't want to kind of let yourself down by not knowing the key words. So just take a quick screenshot and make sure you know what those key words are. All right. And then the last slide, helpful quotes. So these are quotes that could link to these themes, these topics in theme A, relationships and family. Some Christian, some Islam. This is not a list you have to memorize in any way, shape or form. This is a list of quotes that you could use. And I would suggest to pick 2 or 3 that you could link to as many different topics as you can. And just to kind of learn those ones. Ones that you can evaluate from both points of view. Yeah. So again, might be worth taking a screenshot or picture and then referring back to them later on. And you don't need to learn the whole quote either, just a phrase that kind of summarizes the point, and then just put that into as many questions and as many answers as you can basically. Okay, so that is theme A. We've gone through the whole thing, and I've given you the keywords, and I've given you some helpful quotes there, given you lots of contrasting views. So the key thing to remember is the contrasting views, particularly sex before marriage, homosexuality, gender, roles of men and women, and divorce and remarriage. Remembering those contrasting views. Quite easy to remember because Catholics are generally the odd one out when it comes to viewing these things. And then other Christians generally more liberal and more moderate. And then sometimes Islam agrees with liberal Christians, perhaps permitting divorce and remarriage. And then sometimes Islam agrees with Catholic view on perhaps things like sex before marriage and homosexuality. Okay.